Hello, project people, and welcome to the Project Chatter podcast. I am Val Matthews, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Dale Fung.
How's it going, folks? Hey, Val.
Hey, mate. This is exciting. I get to speak in this episode with Ben Aston. Hey, Ben. Great to have you on the show, mate.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure. On this pod, we'll be chatting to Ben about the digital project manager and probably delve into Agile, Scrum, and what is digital in a project management setting, and a little bit about entrepreneurship, I'm sure. But before that, here's Dale with Ben's bio.
Cheers, Val. So I'm going to get straight into this. This is a pretty cool bio, actually. Ben Aston is a digital project manager and online entrepreneur. He's the founder of Black and White Zebra, an indie media company on a mission to help people and organizations succeed. Ben brings over 15 years of experience in both strategic thinking and tactical implementation from a career at top digital agencies in the UK, the US, and Canada, including Tag, Dare, is it Wunderman or Wunderman?
Wunderman, yeah.
Wunderman. I wasn't quite sure, spelt with a German twist to it. DLKW Lowe and DDB. He's been fortunate enough to work across verticals, including transit, utilities, FMCG, consumer electronics, eCommerce, automotive, financial services, public sector, and retail brands. I thought it wasn't going to stop.
Wow.
Ben is a certified Scrum Master, PRINCE2 Practitioner, and founder of the digital project management blog called The Digital Project Manager. So as Val says, welcome to the pod, Ben. How are you feeling?
Yeah, good. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be chatting with you guys today.
No, it's an honor and a privilege to have you because your pod's been around for a while. We've listened to a couple ourselves, and take great inspiration from what you're doing. And I think there's quite a lot of similarities and parallels in terms of what we want to do with our platforms, and help the community at large out there. So I think it's fantastic. So thank you very much for joining us. But as with most guests, a great bio. But I guess I always love to start with the origin story, because I've yet to actually come across someone that intentionally started out to get into project management. What was it for you? Was it intentional, or did you fall into it?
Yeah, well, I think I was tricked into it, which was has that ever happened before? So yeah, I was at a digital, well, actually, I was at an above the line advertising agency. So I was working on TV, radio, and press in account management. I then transitioned into a digital agency and was doing an account management role. So I was managing the relationships with the clients. And then I got recruited for a role that was called a producer. And I was told by the recruiter that, hey, this is essentially the same thing as what you're doing right now. It's account management. You get to be involved in delivering the projects a bit more. So I went through the interview process. Obviously, I got the job. But on day one, I discovered that actually a producer and an account manager are very different things. When I got tasked, my first task, I think, was, okay, can you just create a timeline, a Gantt chart for this project? And I'd never even opened up MS Projects before. So that was a very rude awakening into my role as a producer when I realized I was, in fact, maybe I was a producer, but it was definitely more project management than account management. And so I was tricked into it right at the start.
Wow, amazing. And was it something that naturally came to you? Was it a bit, as you say, foreign and awkward in the beginning? Because I know people that sort of they look and they go, wow, this is, why wasn't I doing this? It just makes sense. And others kind of go, what the hell is this? Like, it's so weird.
Yeah, do you know what? I think there's parts of it that I got. And I think the reason that I probably got that first job was because I did understand a lot about delivering digital projects. So since I was 14, I've been making websites and doing stuff online. So I could talk the talk about delivering. I just hadn't managed anyone else really doing it before. So I understood it, and I understood the context really well. But I just never had to create a statement of work, a budget, a timeline before. Learning these hard skills was something that was new to me, even though I understood the context in which it was all happening. So I think, by nature, I'm not a person who is naturally super organized, but it's something that I've had to learn, and so I can switch it on when I need to.
That's brilliant. That you can draw from it if you need to. That's great. So let's get into it. What is a digital project manager?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that when I started the Digital Project Manager and registered that domain name, I was like, what? This exists? This is, no one's got this yet. And I think it was because right back when I started, so I started the Digital Project Manager back in 2011. And at that point, I think digital project management was the preserve of really the agency world. So it came out of a place where people wanted to differentiate, hey, this is a project manager within a digital agency. Now, I think since then, the digital project manager role has evolved to be a role that you'll find in large organizations, in digital agencies, in other agencies as well. And I think so now the digital part of project manager really just denotes the environment or the flavor of work that we're engaged in. So I think of project managers, I talk about, we're all milkshakes, and digital project management is the strawberry flavor, which is my favorite, obviously. And so we're operating in a world where there's bytes, there's pixels, there's often data involved. We're working with stuff that's on screens. It's often B2C focused. So there's consumers involved, there's users, and we're trying to optimize on that user experience. But yeah, it's the world of bytes and pixels and delivering projects in that realm.
This is fantastic. I mean, just that little summary there of what it is. We could go down so many different routes, Val.
Yeah,
exactly. We haven't really had a guest on yet with someone of your experience and background, and so I'm automatically, my brain is going, which way do we go? Which rabbit hole do we go down? But I guess for me to start off, I'd really love to start off just to talk a little bit about getting into podcasts with the digital project manager first, because I'm really intrigued about that before we move on to the more, the industries that you worked in, how it differs from infrastructure and the rest and that type of thing. I really just want to know about that, because as a fellow podcaster, I'm going, what motivated you to do that?
Do you know what? Yeah, I think we've recorded now, I don't know, 160 something episodes, I think it is.
Wow.
And I think the motivation behind it was that I like talking to people, really. And I thought it was a good opportunity to actually spend some time with some people who were writing content for the Digital Project Manager site and just have a conversation with them. And I think so often when we end up writing blog posts, which is what you'll find lots of on the Digital Project Manager, or at least that was how it started, we can quite quickly and easily find ourselves drawn into kind of pure play theory without really addressing some of the realities of the practical application of that theory. And I think project management is full of actual really heavy dense theory that's totally divorced from practical implementation. And I'd point at the PMBOK particularly for that. But and so what I wanted to do was something that was quite opposite to that. It's like, okay, well, we know the theory, but how do we actually apply that theory into practice? So I was interested in having conversations with people where we picked apart the theory a bit and we talked about how the theory and why the theory doesn't work and what we do in those situations.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so if we pick on some of those theories, then, I mean, I think we were going to go down the rabbit hole of Agile. And I don't think we talk about, we've had a lot of guests, I think, talking about infrastructure and transport types, big projects, mega projects, and the standard waterfall methodologies, but we haven't really delved too deep, have we, Dale, into the Agile world? For the listeners, let's try to create a baseline. What is Agile, firstly, from your perspective, Ben? The simple version.
Oh man, yes. I mean, and that this is where the debate begins. What is Agile? And I think there's
what is Agile? Yeah.
There's two schools of thought on this. I subscribe to what I would call a kind of lowercase Agile. So often I think a Scrum methodology is conflated with Agile, because I think if we understand what Agile is, the Scrum methodology is one of the most popular processes or frameworks for delivery within an agile context. And agile just really at its core talks about delivering things iteratively, collaborating with people, and really focusing on that collaboration over documentation. Is focusing on delivering increasing amounts of value over time, listening to users and using their feedback to build, test, and learn, and then iterate on it. So it's this, it's an iterative approach where we're really focused on delivering value early and often. And that enables us, ideally, in a product-based environment, for the stakeholders to get better value and to get more value earlier on in the process. So I would describe that as a kind of a lowercase agile explanation. When I'm not talking about Kanban or I'm not talking about Scrum, I'm just talking about a mindset which is value driven, which is iterative, and it's the way we approach, the mindset for how we approach project delivery, normally within a product kind of environment, which is all about delivering value.
That's a really good definition, because it's all about some form of output and including the customer in the journey, and that's a really good way of putting it. And some of the challenges is when people say agile and then they do something else, like they might just run a sprint, is another popular term. So there's all these terms underneath the agile, let's call it the umbrella of agile. But you mentioned Scrum there, and I think Scrum's a really good part of knowledge and wisdom that you could definitely educate our listeners on. So what is Scrum, and how have you used it in the past?
Yeah, so Scrum is a framework for agile delivery. So it tries to take some of those principles and ideas about how we can deliver better, and there's quite a robust framework around it. So within Scrum, there's some different roles. There's a Scrum Master, which is kind of akin to a project manager who leads the team. There's a product owner who decides what should be built. And there's the delivery team as well. They're the ones who are actually getting the work done. So within Scrum, we normally create some time-boxed increments. They're normally in 2 weeks increments, and these are called sprints. And we have a backlog of things that we need to work through that are prioritized. So we take something from that backlog, or maybe a number of items from that backlog, and those items become what we're going to focus on during a 2-week sprint. And the idea is that we, as a team, collectively decide how much we can deliver. We work on those items during the sprint. And at the end of the sprint, we review them. We review whether or not they pass the criteria. And if they do, then they get shipped. If they don't get approved, then they don't get shipped. But the Scrum is something that happens every day during this sprint process, where we have a daily catch up and we talk about what we did yesterday, what we're planning on doing today, and any blockers, and that's facilitated by the Scrum Master or the project manager. So it's a framework that very clearly defines this is what happens in this order, and these are the ceremonies, and these are the people involved, and that, in a nutshell, is Scrum.
Even when you explain it, it sounds so simple, yet the practice of it, the application of it seems to, well, in my experience, and it's not a big experience, but my experience is it's not always well executed. What are some of the things that people have challenged? What are the challenges in kind of adopting Agile that you think? Is it education? Is it the business pace? Is it the ambiguity around the scope of the work? What could it be?
Man, there's so many things. This is why when I hear people saying, "Hey, let's do this agile," I first question, okay, what do they mean by agile? And when I find out what they really mean is Scrum, then I start questioning, okay, well, is this going to work? Because there's a few reasons why this falls apart. I think one of them is it really relies on the stakeholders being really engaged in the project, or it really involves the product owner being empowered to make decisions on behalf of the stakeholders. And I think what we often have with large projects is a product owner who's not really the owner. They're not really empowered to make decisions. And within this environment, we need decisions to be made quickly. And in order for us to keep going, we're working in these 2-week increments. We're trying to deliver as much value and ship things as quickly as we can. But if we're waiting on our product owner to talk to all the stakeholders and get feedback on a deliverable, then it doesn't really work. The whole thing begins to fall apart quite quickly. So it works great for software development, where the stakeholders are maybe external and the team is fully empowered and funded internally. But as soon as we have other people weighing in with their opinions, the whole approval process becomes a real blocker to progress.
And that's where the Scrum Master comes in, right? Is that right, Ben? To create that environment, protect those outside influences?
Well, yeah. So the idea of the Scrum Master is they are there as they're the shepherd of their flock, and the flock is their team, and they're the shepherd there, trying to protect the team from being robbed externally or being pulled onto different projects. They're trying to kind of go ahead of all their sheep and get all the blockages out the way so that the team can just come careering after them and get as much done as they can. I've never described it as a shepherd and a flock before, but there we go. And but I think, I mean, that's one thing. One challenge we have is that, is that product owner really empowered? And are they, can the stakeholders really approve things quickly? Another thing, which I think you just alluded to, Val, was this idea or challenge of the engagement model, where we have this ambiguity. We're not quite sure what we're going to deliver, and we're not sure when we're going to deliver it. So how do you work out how much someone should pay for it? So unless you're doing it on a pure time and materials basis, which is scary for anyone who's paying for anything, how are you going to agree what the scope is going to be? And Scrum doesn't really accommodate for that.
I love that you use shepherd and flock, but what sprung to mind was herding cats.
I just couldn't think who's the head of the cat herd.
Exactly.
The cat master.
Perhaps the pied something else. Who knows?
Yeah.
But no, that's fantastic. Thanks for clarifying that. And then bringing in, you used another word there called Kanban. Is that something in addition to, separate to Scrum?
Yeah, so Kanban's another framework, another delivery framework that we can apply. It definitely fits under that agile umbrella that you were talking about. And Kanban is simpler than Scrum because we're not defining increments of time that we're working within. We're not trying to ship things, get as much work as we can in a 2-week increment, and then we're not going through these 2-week cycles or sprints. In Kanban, is based on a Toyota manufacturing process, which is all about, okay, how can we optimize our throughput? So if you think of a factory and how a factory is trying to increase their throughput, well, that's what Kanban is. We're trying to actually limit the amount of things that we have in progress at any one time so that the team can just be focused on delivering a few things really well. And as they get better at delivering those things, then we can increase the amount that we're pushing through. But it's all about limiting flow to maximize output. So we still have a backlog of things we want to work through. And if anyone's familiar with Trello, Trello is a Kanban tool where we have a backlog of things we want to do. Then they get moved into that doing column. And then once they're done, they're done. But that Kanban process can have different columns as we add different parts to the process. But we're just moving things through the process and trying to limit the amount that we move through the process at any one time so that we reduce the amount of friction we have or bottlenecks in the process.
Can you have a marriage of the two? Can you have Scrum and Kanban coexisting?
You mean a Scrum ban? Yes. Yeah.
There's a word for it.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing, and this is my philosophy on Agile. You can do whatever you want. And I think diehard Agilistas, as I'll call them, will say, hey, but that's not Scrum, or but that's not Kanban. And my response is, it doesn't matter. If it works, if it delivers value, then let's do it. And I think sometimes we can get dogmatic or confused about whether or not we know a methodology or a framework properly. But fundamentally, what I think is important is that, are we delivering value for our stakeholders? Is the team happy? Are we happy? If we are, then who cares what we call it? If it works, it works.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, as Val says, that the little bits we know about, Agile, and there's lots of different types of subcategories of Agile, if we can call it that. And like I said, the little bits we know, you can mix them up and match them in whatever makes sense. But one of the ones that I really like about it is the iterative nature, as you talk about, and the communication. Because often on the projects that Val and I work on, the big major infrastructure projects, people don't talk to each other.
Yeah.
And I really like that the communication that sort of you get with Agile is great, because you're talking all the time. But the other thing that I like, and I don't know if it'll quite work on, like I say, large infrastructure projects, but landing strips that you get. So maybe we can go into that. I'll let you explain. Landing strips. What are landing strips in Agile?
I don't know.
You
Tell
don't
me.
know?
What's a
That was new to
landing
me. I
strip?
was keeping quiet because I had no idea.
Oh, really? Okay. So my understanding.
Educate us, Dale,
Well,
please.
maybe it's called something. Maybe it's called something different, Ben. But my understanding of landing strips is that if you had a project and you had perhaps 100 bits of functionality you want to output, that you'd agree you'd have, these are your 90 core, and you may have the 100, but you'll fall somewhere in between. So that's your sort of your scope landing strip. And then you'll set a time frame that you'll perhaps deliver it within the period of either the earliest date here or the latest date 3 months later. So you've got landing strips of both time and scope, but that allows you to be a bit more agile as well. So I don't know if you call it something different, perhaps.
That's cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I've never, yeah, and I think this is the interesting thing, isn't it? Because depending on who our stakeholders are and how we have to manage those stakeholders, we start employing and using different terms and techniques to find ways to make it work, to find ways to make a more iterative approach work for them and help them feel comfortable about it. And I think, being focused on collaboration is so important. And so techniques like the landing strip method, I think is great, where we can say, okay, well, will this make you feel more comfortable? Will this make you feel like you're getting value? Will this make you feel like you can communicate and collaborate with your stakeholders to get them to sign off the budget or whatever else it might be? So I think these are all great hacks for making a more collaborative approach work well.
No, absolutely agree.
Does that work? Does that work, Dale, though? Because it's almost, and I'm going back to waterfall there. I'm just processing it in my head there. Scenario playing, Ben. So if you're like every other management company or every other management team that I know, they'll be like, well, you're going to finish on the early date, but you're actually going to finish on the late date because you consume what you have. So if you set a budget, you'll consume the budget. If you set a time frame, you consume the time frame. Does the landing strip actually work?
So I've not used it in practice.
Okay.
Like I say, the limited theory I've done around Agile and different methodologies, that's one I came across. So yeah.
Must be an aviation type
No,
terminology there.
I think more in software development. So if you're creating a new web page potentially, and we want all this functionality on the website, you might go, right, the max functionality we want at the latest date is X. But if we can deliver earlier, this is the minimum viable product that we'll have. So yeah, interesting. That's great. We can chat about the stuff here. But that leads me then into Ben going, okay, now we've got an understanding of what Agile is, or perhaps even isn't. There's so much content out there. I don't expect this to be a tutorial from yourself, but just a good basis of understanding. It then leads me to go thinking, okay, well, can Agile exist with waterfall or in the big infra, oil and gas potentially type projects? And we've heard Wagile being mentioned in some way, shape, and form as well. But what's your view on that? Because you obviously looked at this, you've spoken to lots of experts, written about it potentially.
Yeah. So I mean, this is where, I think, well, why not? I think, and I think this comes back to whether or not, well, what Agile actually is, and it's a set of values and principles that clarify some optimal ways of working together. And so I think there's no reason why. I don't think Agile is necessarily at one end of the spectrum and waterfall is at the other. I think waterfall just describes a process that we go through, and I think we can apply an Agile mindset to that process. So why can't we focus on, less documentation? Why can't we focus on trying to collaborate? Why can't, in a waterfall project, why can't we talk to users? These are all things that are very agile. Why can't we be iterative? We can still iterate. We can build iterations into a waterfall project plan. That's totally feasible. So I think there can be a beautiful marriage of the two. And I mean, things start falling apart when we talk about, how we deal with the budget and with the timeline and with the scope of work. That's where a waterfall approach would say, well, here's the cost and here's the timeline, and maybe there's some contingency. And the agile approach would be, well, we don't know how much it's going to cost and we don't know what the timeline will be. So I think there are ways that we can marry these two things together by just applying that agile mindset about delivering value early and often and collaborating, and put on those goggles as we look on our project and think about, well, how can we add iterations into the different steps in our process? So rather than just having a really gated process where there's kind of one cycle, how can we add additional cycles in? How can we reconfigure the project so we're delivering value early and often? How can we incorporate user feedback early on in the process so that we're not designing everything up front before we're building it, and we're actually finding ways to build, test, and learn? And I think that's more of a mindset than a particular process.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does make it tricky marrying the two and I think there is some places where it's, applicable and it's quite easy to do, switch between the two. When you're on mega projects, I think that the challenge is I think when you explain agile, it's more around product and method, and waterfall's definitely around the workflow in terms of the entire end-to-end piece. And generally with waterfall, the reason why people love it so much is it makes clients feel good in a certainty way from a time and cost perspective. So they've put contracts in place and they said, well, this is the date we're going to hit. And you go, okay, that's the date we're going to hit. And you don't get that level of certainty when it comes to software or products, let's say, but you don't anyway. So there's no way to really plan software in waterfall either, because as we know through your experience, if there's defects in the software or the software doesn't pass testing, it goes back to the lab, back to the factory, and then they retest. So it's not something, and this is a really tricky part. I'm not sure what the answer is, Ben, but maybe you can give some insight. Is there an opportunity then for something else to come into that place? And like you said, agile could be anything, which I kind of like that. It's such a broad spectrum, and that allows the futurists to come in and kind of shape it as well. Is there an opportunity from a digital perspective that maybe machines could do something better than humans in this space? Like if we said, and I'm going future now, so hold on to your chair.
I'm
but Elon Musk on us.
It's super out of here. Yeah, Mars is next. So if you gave all of these inputs and all these methodologies, and you pushed it into a machine, so it had all the algorithms and all the methodologies and all the principles, and then it had your human principles as well, and how you wanted to work together, and you wanted to work in a Scrum, and you wanted to use it to find solutions that met the customer's needs. Could a machine do that, in the next 5 years, let's say, and produce something that was a really unified theory? I'm looking for a unified theory here.
Yeah, no problem.
Sweet.
Apart from we're humans and people, and I think it's that people element actually that's why project managers are needed. It's the human connection piece between people and between data. So whilst machines can for sure analyze data really well and provide, given a binary decision, then sure they can say yes or no to something. But I think actually we're missing out on the strategic component that project management can and should bring, I think, to a project, which is all about that driving value and understanding what drives value, what's going to deliver the most value the earliest, and how can we connect these different points of view, these different perspectives. How can we get a shared understanding of what that value really is and what matters? So it's those complexities of stakeholder engagement and management and understanding value and delivering on that value, which is what I think, that's why project management can never be reduced to a series of inputs and outputs. And I know that there's a Gartner article that went around, I think it was last year, that was like, something that said something exactly like that. Like in 10 years,
Yeah, I did.
10 years, project management's dead. Long live project management automation, because 80% of project management tasks can be automated. Well, I guess it depends what you think of as a project management task. And I think where the evolution of project management is going, I guess, as we become better equipped with data insights, is around, it's the soft skills of project management and creating alignment, direction, and ensuring that we have full control, rather than being about, this isn't about creating a timeline and a scope and an estimate anymore. Those are hard skills that a machine can learn, but that the facilitation piece that we provide as project managers, that's, I think, the future of it. And I think that's the bit that we can't replace.
I completely agree with that. I think the storyteller or the presenter mode, and the empathy that project managers bring teams together, to motivate them to actually get out of bed and want to work on a project that's hard. Completely understand that. To manage customers' expectations as well. Machines can't do any of that stuff. I don't know what Gartner was thinking when they wrote that, because I read the similar article, and I was like, really? But I think hopefully they were referring to low value transactional tasks, which makes sense on a big volume. If you've got high volume, and it goes back to your point around, a production factory, or I used to use the sausage factory. How many sausages do you want to get through the assembly line? And there's an optimal rate that you can calculate through Little's law, and that makes sense. And so for that, point A to point B, sure, machines should talk to each other. They can do it for us. But the controlling element should still be human-centric, which is an important point. But it brings up another really important point, and I'd love to get your view on this, Ben, before I hand off to Dale. But definitions. So, back in the day of books, right, where books were hard, and you had to have a physical dictionary if you're in year 10 English and the teacher says something, what the hell she's talking about, and you'd have to look up the word. What I find now is, and it'd be like one definition, that's it. What I'm finding now, and maybe it's just me, is there's multiple definitions for the same terminologies, and I guess the internet has exploded this, and so there's variable points of definitions and points of view and reports, and they all come from some credible sources. And this might be the thing that's distracting and detracting people from the project management craft and understanding it properly, because we don't have a lot of, there's a skill gap, particularly in PMO and project management, in the project space. And it's maybe this is why there's so many different definitions. If someone comes to Ben and they say, let's do Agile, and you're like, great, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean? Do you find the same thing, that there's just this plethora of definitions for the same terms?
Yeah, and do you know what? I think that's why, for me, embracing project management as an art and not a science is what's important, because I think the more, and I get this all the time when, someone will ask me a question. We run a online school for digital project management, and someone will ask a question and they want a really straight answer. It's like, well, why can't you tell me the answer to that? And because the answer is always, it depends. And let's talk about some of the things that it depends on. And that's why we can't provide, that's the reason we can't provide a solid, this binary answer to things. It's not a yes or no. It's not you've got 3 choices and you need to choose one of them. There's a variety of different things we could do. We're melding methodology. We're melding our approach. We're using our soft skills. You talked about empathy, which is super important. This is why what we do is an art and not a science. And I think again, I'm going to blame PMBOK, has created a textbook and a culture in project management which says that if only you learn this book, you'll know all the answers, and we're going to test you on the answers. And if you can spit out the right answer to the question, then you're qualified, as long as you've done enough hours worth of project management, which I think is like fundamentally wrong, because what we do is art. It's not science. And so I think blaming the PMI for this, but this isn't a book that you can learn. This is an art.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. And, whenever someone does come at me with, oh, this is the structured way to do it, and this is how we did in the last project or this project, whatever case, I go, that's great. That's a great lesson to be learned and carried over. But every project is a unique endeavor with a definite start and definite end. So you can't take, it's not a carbon copy. If it was, it wouldn't be a project. It would be, as Val was alluding to, manufacturing line or whatever the case may be. But I agree with you. I think as long as we are involved in projects that create something for people, you can't take away the people element in actually producing that. So as Val says, perhaps those low value transactional type activities will definitely get a look in with AI, but not some of the more emotional ones. I just wanted to jump back into your breadth of experience, talking to all various experts and your blogs and the community, because you've amassed a great following. What are some of the common themes that people struggle with these days? And has it changed over time? Do you find different queries coming in, or do you find similar type conundrums that people are going, I don't know how this works, I don't know how that works? I'm just wondering, because feedback is a very hard thing to get, particularly from a broad community. But you've done it for a while, and it'd be amazing to get your view on that.
Yeah, I think the typical suspects are probably what you'd expect. Like the challenges that without fail people encounter are resourcing and getting the right people at the right time on the right project. So applying a limited amount of resource, and then it comes down to a discussion about power, which is who gets to choose. So resourcing is one thing. Stakeholder management would be a kind of second theme, which is internal and external stakeholders. So a lack of alignment and clarity in managing expectations fundamentally. And I think those and then the kind of typical tactical challenge is scope creep, whether that's internal gold plating or external mismatched expectations around what was agreed or not agreed. Though that's the kind of classic problem that every project manager is encountering day in, day out.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it certainly sounds very common across the board. But so stakeholder management's a quite interesting one, because we've been speaking about this quite a lot lately, and you've referred to the PMBOK for it's, and there's others out there. Nothing actually teaches leadership or people skills or anything like that. It's all theory. This is a WBS. This is, statement of work. This is a project plan. This is your cost baseline. But nothing actually teaches you how to actually use that with people and all those different skills. Are there some resources that you've come across in your time that people can go to that are great for getting that? I mean, other than Digital Project Manager podcast and Project Chatter podcast.
Yeah. So I haven't found them yet. I'm curious what ones you found. And I think it's because teaching someone how to create a document or use a document is actually not that difficult. It's a template and you fill it in. So yeah, I've done lots of training like that, which is, okay, this is how you do it. But yeah, how you engage stakeholders around it is certainly not something that's covered very often. And that's why, so we have an online membership for people who are delivering projects in a digital world. And that's why we have monthly workshops. And the focus of those monthly workshops is, okay, well, how do we actually do this? Sure, we have a risk register, but how do you create it? How do you engage stakeholders in it? What do you do with it when a risk pops up? What do you say? When do you say it? How do you say it? And so yeah, thinking beyond the document and the template, and thinking through, actually, that's not what's important. What's important is the process around that piece of documentation. And if we can involve people and collaborate with people in the process of creating that document or template or whatever it is that we're doing, and we engage them in that process, then we're much more likely to have a good output when it comes to actually using it. So yeah, involving people in the process and not just thinking because we create documentation, we're doing a good job, I think is super important.
That's really interesting. And without giving away your full lessons, but what are perhaps the top 3 things you focus on when it comes to those skills?
Yeah, so I think it's all about alignment. And when it comes to stakeholders, it's helping people, making them feel heard, making sure that we have heard them. So we get alignment by getting people's insights, by playing back to them what we've heard, and treating communication as a two-way street. Getting alignment around that, and then once we've created that piece of documentation, making sure that we've put in feedback loops so that we're just double checking. Hey, so are we on the right track here? Is this right? Does this still make sense? And I think it's those treating our team, our stakeholders, like people who are like us, who are fallible, who make mistakes, who forget things, and probably going a bit slower and probably spending a bit more time picking up the phone and chatting to people, rather than just thinking, because I created a document, I did my job. I think, yeah, it comes back to that process. How can I make this fun and enjoyable to be part of this project, and engage people in that process so that they look forward to getting their status report, because they know it means that later on that day, you're going to have a conversation where you'll have done the heavy lifting, you'll have pulled out the information they need to know. And I think it comes down to like having real clarity. And I think sometimes as project managers, we don't have the information, so we're not very clear. So we're deliberately fuzzy. And then when we can't have that clarity, then there's no trust there. So I think having the right data, being clear about it, enables us to be honest and transparent, which develops trust, which again, in turn, helps drive that collaboration. So I think there's a bit of a virtuous cycle of, we need to be good at our jobs. We need to be on top of the data. That allows us to control and lead the project in a way where we're not fudging things, but we can afford to be open and transparent, because that's the precedent we've set, that we're transparent, we're open, this is an open book project management, rather than, okay, let me get back to you in a week's time.
Yeah, that makes a perfect sense. And I think we did a pod, Dale, a few weeks ago, where we talked about leadership, and we touched on all those things that Ben mentioned, particularly trust. And it's great if you've got a company that encourages and sponsors the project manager and enables them, and gives them the charge to take lead and be vulnerable. The vulnerable leader is such an interesting perspective. I think we're seeing more of that now. I know a few consultancies that focus on that space, that they come in and they look at the senior leadership team and they're like, right, guys, you can't just give orders and expect it from your ivory tower and expect people to move. That's not how people are motivated anymore. Certainly younger generations are a lot more, they're expecting more than just a salary. They want to know that they're contributing. They want to know that they're valued. They want to be part of something that's compelling and interesting. And so user experience is far more important than it's ever been. And I think this digital space, particularly after the COVID, moving everyone to remote platforms, has just opened everyone's eyes to say that, well, you can do it. But there are some challenges to the personality piece where, a project manager's value to leverage is actually their ability to form relationships, which comes through trust, right? So if you're in a face-to-face, it's a lot easier, because a lot of the work is nonverbal, to build trust and rapport, and influence decisions and discussions, which you need to do as a project manager. You need to put your political hat on and your coach hat on and all the teacher hat on and all this stuff. From a digital perspective, do you see tech? So this is probably tapping into your entrepreneurial spirit there, Ben. Is there a digital glass ceiling, let's say, where Zoom and Teams, and can they only take us so far, or do you see like a bit of tech that's going to come out in the next couple of years that will revolutionize human interactions a bit closer on a digital platform?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I've seen actually this year is project insight tools, which kind of touches on your Elon Musk moment earlier,
Nice.
but didn't
He has
go.
plenty of those.
Yeah. So a couple like worth mentioning. One's called Melly.ai, and that is it's using algorithms to reveal patterns of success and failure. So it evaluates project data, like connects with your tools, and
Mhm.
helps you identify using that analogous data where projects failed in the past, what's happening on your project now that could lead to failure. And I think that's super interesting because I think those early warning signs are what we as project managers need to enable us to then deploy our soft skills. But if we spend all our days in data, looking at the numbers, churning through things, trying to identify trends, trying to spot things, that is massively time consuming, and it pulls us away from spending time with people. So I think Melly.ai is cool there. Another interesting one is called Perflow. And that's all about team performance analytics.
How do you spell
And
it?
Perflow is Perflo.
Perflow.
Perflow, yeah. So they're looking at measuring team performance. Again, looking at all the data and all your tools, seeing what's happening, using sentiment analysis as well as other analysis to identify how comfortable the team are feeling. And again, I think tools like this, which enable us to deploy our soft skills, to give us as the PMs, hey, a little nudge. Do you realize that Sally over there is a bit annoyed with Billy because they're not on the same page? Like, you can just tell by the way they're talking to one another. But as PMs, we, particularly in this COVID world where we're not maybe on the ground with people in the same way that we were before, we could like look across the office and sense that something was going on. Now that we can't spin around in our chair and do that, I think these tools that give us some insight into what is going on below the surface are going to help us do that job of project managing and leading projects better, and being more strategic about the way that we do it and the way that we use our time. I think it's going to be super helpful.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think it's a hard one to gauge the future, but it's I mean, there's the value working from home, isn't there? I mean, let's be honest. And there's some insights like you find out certain things, like you can see their wall backgrounds. They got some photos there. They got a dog. The kids come running in, so you do get a window into their world, which is great. And everyone's casual. There's no collared shirts or ties anymore, or formal wear. I feel sorry for the suit retailers out there. Sorry, guys. But I think there's still a challenge, and I've got some guys that I know working in the VR space, let's say, that they're trying to bring the whole holographic experience, so that'd be a virtual boardroom, let's say, and you'd have a virtual body there. But that seems still far off from my perspective. Like, I haven't seen anything that I go, geez, that's awesome, I'm going to invest right now. Like, it's the next big thing. So I'll definitely check out those sites. They look really interesting. Thanks, Ben. That's great. Over to you, Dale.
Yeah, so Ben, I think we could chat for hours and hours, but I kind of just have, as we head to the sort of the end section of the pod, I kind of just have one more question. You've worked across many verticals, as your bio says. Favorite vertical, or perhaps favorite project that you've worked on? Come on, let us know.
Oh man, I think oh, this is hard. So my favorite two are probably fairly early on in my career. One of my clients was Land Rover, and that was super fun because Land Rover sponsor all kinds of things. So I got to go to film premieres and rugby games, anything that they were sponsoring. I got to go along for the ride, which was awesome. And we got to drive Land Rovers all over the place. So that was super fun.
We need to get Land Rover over here.
Land Rover.
Come on the podcast.
Land Rover's a good client to have. And the other cool one was Sony. So Sony was super fun because we did some really interesting projects. These are both clients who had money not to burn, but money to invest.
Yeah.
And it meant the projects were fun. So Sony, we did some really cool work for, and they gave us access to the staff shop as well. So I got myself all kitted up with Sony stuff. So for me, yeah, as the PM working on these projects where the client had money, we were doing innovative work that was cutting edge, that were really pushing the boundaries of what was possible in digital, which particularly at the beginning of my career, we were building sites in Flash, and we were really pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Digital agencies were a new thing. It was exciting. Every campaign we did, there was new technology that we were trying out and playing with. So it really was the Wild West back then, and it was super fun and super exciting, and things went wrong all the time. Yeah, as the PM, I was there picking up the pieces, but the ride was certainly very fun.
Well, I'm certainly very jealous just listening to that, Val. I think we're in the wrong
Yeah.
verticals. So
Gotta get in those
perhaps we'll,
verticals.
yeah, maybe when we hit stop, we'll type with Ben and get involved with Land Rover.
Absolutely.
But as we head towards the end of the pod, Ben, I do want to thank you for your time. Are there
Yeah.
any final thoughts that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I think this conversation around agile delivery has been super interesting. I think the more that we can focus as PMs on delivering value, about being strategic leaders to our teams, to our projects, for our stakeholders, delivering value early and often, delivering iteratively, building stuff, testing stuff, learning from that, not being afraid of making mistakes, but being transparent and leading as a servant leader, facilitating our teams. For me, I think that's the future of our roles as project managers. So yeah, and if people want to find out more about what we're doing, they can head to the digitalprojectmanager.com. There we've got online training for digital project management. We have a membership where we're writing together the playbook for how we apply things like Agile in a digital world. And you can find all about it there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate that, Val. Final thoughts from you?
No, it was great, Ben. There was some nuggets of wisdom for sure. We went future. We went into the agile Scrum world, which was great. It was really enlightening for me. Yeah, let's keep in touch. And thanks for your time today.
Ben, just before we go, we have a pop quiz called Tenor. So 10 Q&As within 10 minutes. And are you up for that?
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So I'm going to hand to Val for this to take you through it.
All right, Ben, we'll go easy. Don't worry. They're pretty simple questions. First thing on your mind, so you don't think too hard. What's your morning routine?
Oh, get up, go for a run, and make the kids breakfast, and my wife a cup of tea.
Perfect. What do you usually plan out your day? Or how do you usually plan out your day?
Yeah, I block out my time in Google Calendar. So just stick in blocks of time. And I normally do that at the beginning of the week based on my priority list. But it's all about blocking out chunks of time to make sure I make time for the stuff that is impactful and important.
Excellent. I think Elon does that as well, just from memory. But how do you deal with stress?
I think exercise for me is super important. I think as soon as I get stressed, if I am then cutting back on getting outside, having exercise, I think I start flagging pretty quickly. So for me, what's super important is getting my exercise in early during the day, being like predictable and consistent about that. I think that helps me be level-headed and just shuts my brain down a bit, which I think sometimes is when you can begin to abstract yourself from a situation and think a bit more logically about it maybe, and try to kind of take away the emotion from it.
Excellent. What's your favorite book, audio, or movie?
A good book that I read recently is called The One Thing, and it is all about narrowing your focus and doing less, and by doing less, having more impact. And so, I try to implement this in the way that I schedule my time and calendarize things. So in the book, they talk about, if you could just focus on one thing that makes everything else either redundant or easier, what would that one thing be? And then how can you make time to make that happen? And I think so often we kind of chip away at the edges of things rather than focusing on what's the most impactful thing that we can actually do. And I think, really tackling those big problems and being consistent and focusing on those, I think is really actually quite effective.
Yeah, brilliant. Who is your hero and why?
I'm going to say Richard Branson was, I remember doing a book report on Richard Branson when I was, I don't know, 10 or something. And I just found his story inspiring as an entrepreneur. Like at school, he sold Christmas trees and canaries. He has then, developed this global empire of companies from trains to planes. Hasn't done automobiles yet, has he? But he's
No, not yet.
he's incredibly entrepreneurial and focused on delivering great customer experience. And so for me, his kind of wild entrepreneurial style, I think, is what I find exciting and inspiring.
What is your favorite sound?
Oh, waves.
Good answer. I like that. Might steal that. What would you tell your 10-year-old self?
Oh man, try harder at math.
Yeah,
I think
do that.
Yeah, so I didn't. I was going to go to do computer science at university, and then realized after working as a front end developer for a year that I didn't want to do computer science. Anyway, now I would say that I regret not doing computer science. So if I'd have tried a bit harder at math, maybe that would have made my life easier now.
What profession other than your own would you like to have attempted?
So I'm actually about to, and I'm going to go public with this. I'm about to start my flight school training. And
Wow.
I think one thing in Vancouver, we have the world's largest fleet of seaplanes. And I think being a seaplane pilot and just bombing around to drop people off in different places along the coast, that sounds pretty fun.
Yeah,
so
that sounds awesome.
I'm giving it a go.
There you go, Dale. We're going to have to get a free flight when we go over there and visit Ben. Once he's had a few practices. Final question for you, Ben. If you had to spend £1 million, so you'll need to convert that to CAD, in a day, what would you spend it on?
I'd probably buy a boat. So
Nice
yeah,
boat.
I'm there's these really cool boats that are solar powered. I can't think what they're called. Anyway, you can buy a solar powered boat and it can chug along at about 5 knots silently. And if I had $1 million, I would probably drop it on a boat.
And a seaplane, right?
Yeah, and the seaplane. I guess spend half on each. Yeah. I don't even know how much a seaplane is, but I bet it's more than $500,000.
You're going to Google it after this, I'm sure. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for joining us on our tenor bonus round. Dale, over to you, mate.
Cheers. Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate your time, as Val says. I'd encourage everyone to go and have a look at thedigitalprojectmanager.com. There's so much that you've got on there. Listen to Ben's podcast, read his blogs, get engaged in the community, register, sign up, take advantage of everything Ben's accumulated. And folks, you won't be disappointed. But that's all we have time for on this episode. But it doesn't have to stop here. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for the bonus bits and our website for a link to our online community with all of our expert guests. Support our charities and access blogs and previous podcasts at projectchatterpodcast.com. A massive thank you to our guest, Ben Aston. Thank you all for listening. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Till then, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Val, it's bye for now.